I can't believe it's been over a year since we looked at the Wooting60HE for the first time. If you're talking performance, it's still the gaming keyboard to beat a year later, but being able to swap it into a standard 60% custom chassis is what really put it over the top for me. The classic Tofu 60 from KBDfans was always the cheapest and easiest way to make that happen, but when the Wooting60HE was seemingly at the height of its popularity, KBD did something really baffling. They stopped making it. Instead, they released a 2.0 version with a completely different mounting system that was no longer compatible with the Wooting. Luckily, someone over there realized that massive misstep, so now we've got the Tofu 60 Redux. It's priced at only $59 and it comes in a ton of different colors. And we've got some new Hall effect switches from Gateron that we'll look at today too. They did make a pretty questionable design decision with these, which we'll talk about a bit later. So the Tofu Redux still has the same simple wedge geometry with a 7-degree typing angle, but we've got upgraded anodizing for the coating, new feet that run the entire length of the board top and bottom, an option for an internal brass weight, 2 removable standoffs, and 1 killer surprise feature. Now you can slide the USB cutout left or right to match it up exactly with the port on the Wooting PCB. On the first version, you could get pretty close, but not only was your port offset, but the entire PCB was slightly offset in the case. And that's no longer the case. Ugh. The adjustment's super easy too. There's no trial and error to get it just right. You just move it to where it says W and tighten it down. The internal cavity is different here too. You just have a simple rectangle recess in the middle, so you have the option for an internal weight. This is clear coated brass. It'll run you 25 bucks. The case alone weighs in at 793 grams, and with the weight, we've got just over a kilo or just about 2.4 pounds. The V1 Tofu, if you're curious, is 770 grams. We've also got the option to remove 2 of the standoffs here. One by the space bar that I generally use, and one in the center that I normally don't. Skipping these standoffs isn't going to magically unlock a lot of flex because the default plate on the Wooting is steel and it just doesn't flex very much. But if you're running an aftermarket plate or you're waiting for one of Wooting's own internal aftermarket options, it may unlock some flex down the road. For sound dampening, I would normally just use the foam that Wooting put in their stock case. It's not as reflective as the zip and fit shelf liner that I use sometimes, and you don't need to spend any money. Because the weight occupies the lower cavity in the case, you're only going to need 1 layer of sound dampening here. Outside of that, I don't put any tape on the PCB, and I am still using the burger mount system that I outlined in my full Wooting mod video, which I will link at the end of this video. So this was really surprising this time around because I actually prefer it with nothing in there at all. The Redux case even comes with like a little thin piece of liner. I don't use that either. If you put the foam in there, it immediately brings back that poppy sound, so just pick whichever one you like best. It is worth saying too that with that burger mount, you can control the sound of the board to a degree by how tight you keep those screws in there. Only the screw closest to the USB port needs to be really tightened down. You'll know you've got it when you see the port sitting correctly in the opening. The rest of those I leave barely hanging on. All right, looking at these KS20 orange switches, these are pretty similar to Wooting's L45 Leckers because they're both produced by Gateron. The materials for the housing seem to be the same, but the top and bottom seem to fit a little bit tighter on these newer ones, and it could be because my Leckers have been opened a couple times. I have seen some 3D printable films out there, and my OG Lecker switches would probably benefit from these, but honestly, I wouldn't worry about these for the oranges. The stem wobble feels maybe a touch better on these new ones, but it could be placebo. I can get them both to look very similar on camera, and they don't feel any different in game. The springs are different, and that gives us a slight variance on the force curve. Orange is activated 38 versus 40 on the Leckers, and the bottom out force is 50 compared to 60 on the Lecker. The biggest W here is that the factory lube process feels and sounds better than even my hand lubed Leckers, which was a big surprise. When you open these up, it looks like just a little 205 grade 0 on the stem rails, trace amounts in the lower housing rails. The floor of the housing looks totally dry, springs look dry too. The biggest impact if you are going to hand lube these would just be to go around the bottom of the spring and then a little bit in the floor of the bottom housing. But after doing a few of these, it's not that noticeable. Like, you really have to hold it up to your ear. If it's me, I'll probably skip the hand lubing and save the 2 to 3 hours of my life. I've heard that the newer runs of the Leckers also use this thicker lube process, but I wasn't able to confirm that with Wooting. Mine are first batch over a year old. But Gateron made one pretty questionable decision with these, which may or may not affect you. The top housing of this is actually orange. If you see some of the pics, it looks like the top housings are clear. I wish they would have gone that way because these recolor your RGB. If you're running these north facing, it's not terrible. It's only slightly off. South facing is a nightmare. Everything is orange, including the legends if you're running the stock keycaps. This can be an issue because RGB on the Wooting isn't just aesthetic, it's also functional. It reminds you of different changes that you might have made to your layout, and it lets you know what mode your board is in at a glance. They also make a white version of these that are lighter and more in line with like the L45s. These have a white base and a clear top, so it's not going to impact your RGB at all, and the lightweight is better if you're playing something where you're going to be spamming keys a lot. These sound really similar to me if you're spamming a single key. If you're spamming a 4-key set, they sound slightly lower pitched and a bit cleaner. You're looking at 27 per box times 2 plus 15 for shipping, or 69 from Gateron. Nice. Or $42 if you add them at KBD when you order your board. Again, keep in mind that my Leckers are over a year old. They've seen a ton of use, but I don't really feel anything here that offers any tangible advantage. No real difference in the feel at all when you're playing with them. The Wooting is a game of 0.millimeters, so a switch would have to be wild different to have any noticeable change to in-game performance. Overall, the switches are kind of take it or leave it for me, but the case is a major W. If you're already in a custom case, particularly a first-gen Tofu 60, I don't see a reason to upgrade here unless you're just chasing acoustics. I very much prefer the sound of this new model with the brass weight over the V1 version. If you haven't swapped yet and you're looking for a case, this is kind of a no-brainer pickup. Definitely recommend grabbing the weight. My only knock is the black anno copy I have here fingerprints like crazy. It can also be a pretty intense combination of typing angle and front height for some. I personally always use mine with the rest. I get asked about this one all the time. It's the Wooting 60% silicone rest. This thing has a ton of use on it. Can't recommend it enough. So KBDfans knocked it out with the Tofu Redux. It is now the case to beat, at least until Wooting drops their own. Links to everything we talked about today down in the description. If you got any value out of this video today, please drop me a like or consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to talk gear or you need specific recommendations for anything in your setup, best place to do that is the private Discord, which you can check out right here. That's it for today, and I will catch you all in the next one. Stay up.